Please be seated. As the Vice President of Academic Affairs, I welcome all of our students, staff, and faculty to the official start of the 2013-2014 academic year with this opening convocation. It is now my pleasure to introduce Caitlin Boudreau, class of 2014, and our Student Government Association President, who will lead us in an opening prayer.
Thank you, Dr. DeLeo. Universal God, we gather together today, understanding that we come from different places, hold different values, and cherish different beliefs. Yet, we are united in gratitude to be members of the Emmanuel community. As we begin our journey this new academic year, we ask your blessing on the mission of Emmanuel College and the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, which inspire us to work with others to create justice and peace for all. Bless our community members, faculty, staff, and students alike, and infuse in their hearts and souls and minds a sense of wisdom and understanding, a sense of informed decision-making, and a sense of empathy and compassion for their colleagues and fellow students. To be men and women of Namur is to live with a magnanimous heart, and we pray for this gift of heart on this day of yet another convocation gathering. We ask for your blessing upon these days seen ahead, that they might be a time of growth, appropriate challenge, reasonable outcomes, and bountiful love and support. We ask this in the name of Emmanuel, God with us. Amen.
Thank you, Caitlin. I am pleased to introduce the president of Emmanuel College, Sister Janet Eisner, SND. Thanks to Sister Janet's dynamic and inspiring leadership over the past 3 decades, Emmanuel is providing an outstanding liberal arts and sciences education today to a record number of undergraduate and graduate students. Sister Janet is a graduate of Emmanuel, holds a master's degree from Boston College and a PhD from the University of Michigan. I am very privileged and honored to work with Sister Janet. Thank you, Dr. DeLeo.
Good afternoon, and it's very good to welcome you to this academic convocation and the opening of our 95th academic year. Convocation, as you know, is an important tradition dating back to the earliest years of this college and many other colleges. It is an occasion for us to gather as a community and recognize the endeavor that unites and inspires us all, the pursuit of truth, knowledge, and wisdom. We pursue these virtues because they are good in themselves. As a Catholic college rooted in the founding vision of the Sisters of Notre Dame, we go a step further. We pursue teaching, research, learning, and scholarship because these are fundamental to addressing the great challenges and opportunities of every era. The work we will do this year in our classrooms, laboratories, and studios will surely transform us and help bring about a more just and peaceful world. I want to welcome our honored speaker, Dan Ariely, our dedicated faculty, administrators, and staff. I also want to recognize our students. I welcome first our students from our graduate studies and nursing programs. I welcome again the class of 2017, our freshman class, as you begin, students, your college journey, eager for all that lies ahead. The sophomore class of 2016, you are now fully immersed in the liberal arts and sciences as you prepare to declare your major at the end of this year and continue your amazing service to the wider community. I welcome the junior class of 2015. You are now our upperclassmen, continuing your studies and enhancing them through real-world experiences and internships and international studies. Finally, I invite the class of 2014, our senior class, to stand. Seniors, you donned your academic robes at the Mass of the Holy Spirit yesterday. In October, at your cap and gown ceremony, you will be formally invested in the final stage of the baccalaureate. This is a symbolic reminder of your continued growth as scholars and your growth as people of conviction, compassion, and conscience. Let's applaud our senior class. Seated. As we begin this academic year, I look forward to our working together as a college community to make this year a year of discovery, of achievement, and of profound purpose. Thank you.
I now welcome Dr. Lenore Martin, Professor of Political Science at Emmanuel College, to the podium, who will introduce our convocation speaker. Dr. Martin was our Louise Doherty Wyant Professor from 2009 to 2013 and is currently an associate for both the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs and the Center for the Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University. Lenore?
I had to put my glasses on to make sure I look like a professor. Thank you, Sister Janet, Vice President DeLeo, Caitlin Boudreau, our SGA President, and administrators, staff, faculty colleagues, and especially students who are the reason we're all here today. Thank you all for coming. It's truly an honor and a joy to introduce Professor Dan Ariely to you. 4 words come to mind when I think of Dan: perseverance, human kindness, brilliance, and creativity. As some of you may know, Dan Ariely suffered burns over much of his body as a young man. He persevered and sought insights from his tremendous ordeal of years of pain and recovery. He has used those insights to find ways to ease the paths of others who have suffered similar plights, sometimes carving out time to visit and encourage them and help them to move forward. Dan has donated his unique expertise to many causes and people to try to provide and build a more socially just world, something we here at Emmanuel value very highly. I can still remember the evening my husband Tony and I first met Dan. He was about to begin teaching at MIT and was here to find an apartment. A mutual friend had given him our names and we went to dinner together. As he began introducing us to his work, he asked us, "Is it easier on a patient to remove a bandage slowly and carefully, or quickly and thus more painfully, but for a shorter time?" Before you know it, we were totally mesmerized listening to Dan talk about his work as a doctor of psychology and a behavioral economist. Now his work is mesmerizing his students at Duke and millions of others through his best-selling books, his TED Talks, his weekly Wall Street Journal blog, and his tweets. So what makes Dan's work so fascinating? Why do the biggest institutions and foundations, governments from all over the world, and even royalty at Buckingham Palace seek his advice? Using very creative experiments, he plumbs our choices and challenges us to think about why we do what we do. Most of us rarely stop to think why we choose a particular coffee, a particular TV set, a magazine subscription, why we support a particular candidate, or why we repeat a behavior we want so much to change. Through his work, he is challenging us to try to understand ourselves. That may be scary for some of us, fun for others, but it is intriguing for all of us. It affects how we treat ourselves, how we treat our fellow human beings, how we treat our environment. Most importantly, Dan Ariely challenges us to think about how we can make our lives better as we begin to understand our irrational, sometimes rational, behavior. Dan Ariely is James Duke Professor of Behavioral Economics at Duke University, where he holds appointments at the Business School, the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, the Department of Economics, and the School of Medicine. He received his BA in psychology from Tel Aviv University and holds 2 PhDs, the first in cognitive psychology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the second in business administration at Duke University. He has been a fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford and spent 2 years at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study. I could go on talking about the numerous academic journal boards he's on, the numerous awards he's received, the huge number of academic articles he has written, and really, I could take up the entire hour. But I will only take a minute to mention that his first 2 brilliant books, Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions, and The Upside of Irrationality, The Unexpected Benefits of Defying Logic at Work and at Home, were on the New York Times bestseller list. He is here today to talk about his 3rd book, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, How We Lie to Everyone, Especially Ourselves. And I know that most of you in this room have read the book. In a society that is struggling with news about Wall Street scandals, news about scientists altering experimental data, scorecards on politicians inventing facts, or a writer or student plagiarizing a speech, paper, or exam, I honestly think it takes the genius of Dan Ariely to get us to confront, analyze, and address the truth. It is with great anticipation that I give the floor and this microphone to my friend and convocation speaker, Professor Dan Ariely.
So, thank you very much. You're probably wondering why an Israeli guy is standing with an Indian shirt. I learned over time that if you wear a shirt from a different culture, nobody argues with the kind of if you're formal or not formal. Everybody who's politically correct just says it's okay. So, if you need advice for wearing simple clothes, just go with a different culture. So we want to talk a little bit about dishonesty, and to get us starting thinking about this, how many people here have lied at least once in 2013? Okay. What about the last month? The last week? Yeah. Go ahead. I'm not going to ask you about the last day or the last hour. But there was this very troubling experiment in which they put people who didn't know each other in a room, and they said, please introduce yourself to the other person. Talk for 10 minutes. And after these 10 minutes, they put the 2 people in different room and said, did you lie in the last 10 minutes? And people said, of course not. And they said, well, luckily we taped everything you said. Let's play it back to you sentence by sentence. And after each sentence, tell us whether you lied or not. What do you think happened? At the end of these 10 minutes, people admitted to lie between 2 and 3 times in 10 minutes. The reality is that when we think about it, we admit that we lie a lot. Often for good reasons, social politeness, and so on. At the same time that we admit that we're dishonest often, how many people here generally think of yourself as good, honest, wonderful people? Right? The same group? And the question is, how can it be that on one hand we recognize that we're dishonest from time to time, and on the other hand we think of ourselves in such wonderful terms? And this is kind of the conundrum I want to talk about today. But before we do this, I want to say something in defense of dishonesty. There's a story in the Bible that God comes to Sarah. And he said, Sarah, you're going to have a son. And Sarah laughs. And she says, how can I have a son when my husband is so old? And God says, don't worry. And then God goes to Abraham and said, Abraham, you're going to have a son. By the way, this is my version of the Bible. It's written slightly differently. In the original, God comes to Abraham. He said, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham says, did you tell Sarah? And God says, yes. And Abraham says, and what did Sarah said? And God lies. God says, Sarah said, how could she have a son when she is so old? And the religious scholars have wondered, how could God lie? And they came with the conclusion that it's okay to lie for peace at home. And I've talked to many religious scholars about this question, and if you think about it, it's a real dilemma. There are many human values, honesty is one of them, but not all human values are compatible with each other all the time. What do you do with some social values conflict with each other? What happens when somebody's well-being or the goodness of somebody else, or we're late? Do you want to tell somebody, you know, I just didn't get here on time because I couldn't be bothered to leave my room on time? No, you say you blame the subway, or you find some other story to tell, because that basically would not offend the person as much. So we tell lots of lies of this nature, not because we're bad, but because we have a complex social relationship and we take lots of things into account. So now let's talk about real lying. So I know some of you have read my book on this, but I want to tell you a couple of stories about big cheaters that I've talked to. And one of the first ones I talked to, his name is Sam. And when Sam was 12 years old, he was brought to work for his cousin Eddie. His cousin Eddie had a big retail chain. They were selling electronics, VCRs, TVs, radio, stuff like that. And at age 12, he started working for the family. And they taught him the 3 rules of retail. And the first rule of retail was that they advertised particularly attractive things in the newspaper, but when customers came in, they were trying to sell them something else that was more profitable. And they had a very interesting approach of how they would try to convince the customers that what they came in for was not really a good deal and they had to go and get something else. The second rule of retail that he was taught was that their money was their money and there's no need to involve the government in that. So they were trying to keep everything in cash, out of the register, without any evidence, so they don't have to pay taxes on anything. And the third rule of retail was that every winter, they would take all the merchandise they couldn't sell, they couldn't get rid of, they would put in a corner of the warehouse, and they would pretend that the pipes above it broke. Then they would take a hose, they would wet the merchandise, and they would submit an insurance claim. Sometimes the insurance claim would pay them, and they would let them keep the merchandise at a very small cost, in which case they switched to a different insurance company and would wet the same merchandise again the following year. Anyway, from age 12, Sam grows up in this environment. And then when he gets to be 18, he goes to college. And what do you think he goes to study? Well, what would you guess? Accounting. I don't know where have you been. Accounting. Okay, he goes to study accounting, and after 2 years of accounting school, he gets the family together. This is a family-run business. He gets them all together, and he says, we have been doing things the wrong way. We have been skimming. We've been taking an amount of money and not paying taxes. This is called skimming. This is just not the way to go. He says, if we really need to be wealthy, if we really want to be wealthy, this is small potatoes. What we really need to do is to have an IPO. We need to become a public company, then we could really get rich. So he comes with a plan of how they're going to have an IPO. They're going to basically go on the stock market and dump stocks after that. Now, companies that go on the stock market, before they go, they want to show an increase in revenue over time because that determines their multiplier. Now, how do normal companies show an increase in revenues? They work harder. How does the Antar family get increase in revenues? They have another approach. They can cheat less. So for the next 4 years, they cheat by 25% less every year until on the last year, just before the IPO, they don't cheat at all. They show an increase in revenue, they have a very successful IPO, and then they dump $100 million worth of stocks. Okay, up to this point, talking to Sam, he seems like the poster boy for the Chicago School of Economics. The guy has absolutely no morals. It's just about making money. He doesn't care about taxpayers, insurance company, customers. He doesn't care about anything, just about maximizing his own pocket. But this is where the story changes, because I asked him, and how did the family eventually fall from grace? How did most of you ended up in jail? The FBI got hold of most people. And here's the story. The Antor family was a very hierarchical family. Eddie's father used to be the head of that hierarchy. And what happened was that they had the IPO. Eddie, his son, by the way, the retail chain was called Crazy Eddie's. Some of you probably remember that. So Eddie's father was at the head of the family, and he would hold court, and people would come to him for advice and suggestions, and he would basically run the family. But all of a sudden, Eddie sells $100 million worth of stocks. And all of a sudden, guess what? People start coming to Eddie for advice. And his father doesn't like this new arrangement. And he tries to pull things back to him. He tried to get his power back, but he can't. Very hard to fight with $100 million worth of power. So, it turns out Eddie has a wife. Her name is Debbie, and behind her back, everybody calls her Debbie 1. You see where this is going. He also has a mistress, also called Debbie. Everybody calls her Debbie 2. And one New Year Eve, Crazy Eddie's father called Debbie 1 and gives her the address for Debbie 2's apartment. And she goes to the apartment, and Sam said in the family they call this the New Year Massacre. And what was interesting was that in the whole discussion with Sam, he was just perfectly stoic. He was just discussing everything in very simple terms, no emotional reaction whatsoever. This is the first point in the discussion you could see that he is morally opposed. He is disgusted. Something is wrong. And he looks at me and he says, there are some things you don't do. There are some lines you don't cross. You don't tell a wife about her husband's mistress. Everything else was perfectly fine. Cheating insurance company, customers, the government. This was a moral violation for him. And not just for him. In fact, the whole family split into two. And eventually, because they split over this, each of the two parts gave information to the FBI about the other part, and eventually the family disintegrated. Sam said, by the way, that without this moral violation and the split in the family, the FBI would have never gotten them. It was just this that made it so easy for them. Now, here is the thing. When you talk about Sam, there's a question of where he is moral or not. And in the beginning of the discussion with him, he seemed like he had no morals. But that wasn't true. There were just lots of domains of life in which he had no morals. In fact, almost all domains in life, dealing with the government, customers, shareholders, and so on. But there were some domains that were incredibly moral and ethical for him. Things that had to do with in the family. In the family, his handshake was his handshake and his word was his word, and you don't tell a wife about her husband's mistress. There were very strict rules, but only in a sub-part of his domain. Now, Sam is an extreme example, but I would like to suggest that we're all a little bit like Sam. For example, how many people here have illegally downloaded material on your computers? Go ahead, raise your hand high, please. Okay, and I'm guessing the people who don't raise their hand, you just don't know how to do it, probably. Now, how many people here feel bad about it? Now, why is that? I think basically you've all taken this activity called illegal downloads, which you know it's illegal, it's in the name, right? It's not a mystery. And you basically said to yourself, this is not a moral decision. This is not a decision, it's the moral domain, in the same way that Sam have just done it for almost everything in his life. Now, what this suggests is that perhaps we can take these subdomains of our life and basically decide not to consider them as moral, ethical issues and just continue life without debating their moral rightness. Another story I want to tell you is a story about Walt. Walt used to work for a company called MCI. MCI was a phone company still. And his job was to sell phone services to big companies like AT&T and Verizon. And he would sell them lines and services. And at the end of the month, he would send them big bills, tens of millions of dollars, and they would mostly pay back. Sometimes they would argue, but mostly they would pay back. But as MCI was trying to get bigger and bigger, they tried to get less and less savory customers as well. 800 numbers, 900 numbers, predicting the future, all kinds of things like that. And those people did not want to pay MCI. And Walt became from an account manager that would sell big bills and get the money back to all of a sudden have to be a bill collector. And he would go to their offices and he would try to convince them to pay him back, and he would try to argue with them and give them conditions, but these guys would not pay him back. Anyway, the problem for MCI of not getting paid back is two. First of all, he didn't get the money. But the second one is if you had debt that is unpaid, you have to discount all the debt you have by that amount. This is kind of a part of the accounting practices. So this debt was doubly negative, not paying and discounting everything else. So anyway, he was going about this, and for a couple of years he was trying to fight this. And he would go to the people who signed up, these less savory customers, and he would say, please just unenroll them, stop their services. And those people at MCI said to Walt, you know what? It's our job to get new customers, it's your job to get the money, you do your job. Anyway, at some point he goes down to the basement, and he plays a little bit with the accounting software, and he realized that he can take a debt, like $2 million, and replace it with a zero. And all of a sudden, everybody is happy. And he says, you know what, these people are not going to pay anyway, let's just forget the debt. Anyway, he does this for about a year. And then he just doesn't know what to do. So he goes to his previous boss, and he says, how long can I keep on erasing debt with zeros? And by the way, the company is very happy with him. They don't know exactly what he's doing, but they see the books and they're very happy with how the books look. So he gets promoted, he gets to be in charge of more people, everything looks good. Anyway, his boss says, here is what you do. Go to the next customer, threaten them that unless they pay you the $2 million they owe you, you're going to cut them down. Then come back to the office, replace the debt with zero, and call me, your boss, and tell me who you went to talk to. He does this. Goes, threatens, come back, replace the number with zero, calls his boss. His boss now, his old boss, goes to this company and says, I'm an investor. I like your business. Show me your books, maybe I could invest. And he sees their books and he sees that they have a $2 million debt to MCI, and he says, you know what? I'll pay this debt for you. I will make sure that with MCI I'll pay them and they'll erase that debt. Now he knows, of course, the debt is zero already, he doesn't have to pay. And he says, in return, you're going to do two things. First of all, you're going to send me a check for an account in the Cayman Island every month until you pay me the $2 million. And the second thing, we're going to restructure your company. So you're going to start being profitable and you start going to pay your bills on time and so on. And you know what they did? They restructured the company, they paid him to the Cayman Island, and they start paying MCI. And Walt is sitting there happy. He was doing what he did all along, which is to replace number with zeros, but all of a sudden the clients are starting to pay. And they do it with another client and another client and another client. Eventually he got caught and he spent a long time in prison. And if you think about this story, there's a couple of interesting things about it. One is that when Walt started cheating, he wasn't cheating for himself. He was cheating for somebody else. He was cheating for MCI. His work created tremendous pressure on him, and he was not doing it for personal gain. He was doing it to help the company. And the second thing is that as he was cheating, as he moved to the second phase, right, when he was gaining financially through the Cayman Island account, he wasn't doing it directly. He was doing the same thing he did all along, but somebody else was getting the extra money, somebody else was doing the extra step, and he could have justified it as doing the same thing he did all along. Again, a tremendous tribute to two things. One is our ability to cheat for good causes, and the second is that how easily what an easy time we have rationalizing our actions. So, in addition to these stories and discussions I had, and I had discussions with lots of cyclists that are taking drugs. I don't know if you might have heard of some of them. Accounting fraud, insider trading, all kinds of things like that. In addition to that, we also do simple lab experiments, and we try to understand cheating in a small scale. And I know some of you have read the book, but I'll describe to you in a few minutes kind of how generally we do this. And the general procedure we use, we have a few different ones, but the general procedure is the following. We take a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems. These are problems that everybody could solve if they have enough time, but we don't give people enough time. We say you have 5 minutes, solve as many of those problems as you can, and if you in the experiment, you would take the sheet of paper, I would say go, you would turn it over, and you start solving as fast as you can. At the end of the 5 minutes, I would say, please stop, put your pencil down and count how many questions you got correctly. Now you would know how many questions you got correctly. I would ask you to take the sheet, walk to the back of the room, and shred that piece of paper. And then I would ask you to come back, tell me how many questions you got correct, and I'll pay you accordingly $1 per question. People do this, they said they solved 6 problems on average, they leave the room. What the people in the experiment don't know is that we played with a shredder. The shredder only shred the sides of the page, but the main body of the page remains intact, and therefore we can find out how many questions people really solve correctly. And what do we find? On average, people solve 4 problems and report to be solving 6. And this difference between 4 and 6 is not due to a few people cheating a lot, it's due to lots of people cheating a little bit. So now the question is why people cheat and why people cheat just a little bit. And the theory we actually came to, the conclusion we came up to at the end of this, was that people try to balance 2 goals. On one hand, we want to view ourselves as honest, wonderful people. On the other hand, we want to selfishly benefit from cheating. And this is not a calculated selfishly benefiting from cheating, it's a short-term instinct to get something that is good for us now, even if it's not good for us in the long term. By the way, this falling for temptation is something that is very, very general in human nature. For example, how many people here in the last month have eaten more than you think you should? How many people here in the last month have exercised less than you think you should? How many people here have ever texted while driving? Okay. Some people don't have cars, I'm guessing. Last question. How many people here have ever had unplanned, unprotected sex? Nobody. That's really wonderful. That's amazing. Now, if you think about all of those behaviors, these are behaviors when we have a short-term instinct to behave in a certain way, not necessarily good for us in the long term. And we thought that in honesty we have the same thing. We want to view ourselves as honest in principle, in the long term, but at the same time we have selfish desires to get a little bit more selfishly right now. Now, if you have a theory like this, now the question is, how does those 2 forces balance each other, and when do they produce cheating and when do they not? And our assertion was that it had to do with rationalization. That if you want to view yourself as an honest person and you can rationalize, you would cheat more. If you have a hard time to rationalize, you would cheat less. And we've done lots of experiments to try and change rationalization. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Solinor very nicely said that I'm a creative guy. We also showed that creative people cheat more. So I have to admit, it's a strange compliment to get. And why do we find that creative people cheat more? Because if you think about it, you're trying to balance feeling good about yourself and cheating a little bit. It's all about weaving a tale, telling a story. If you're more creative, you're just better able to tell better stories. And therefore, you cheat more. One of the things that was the most distressing for me from our experiments was an experiment in which people filled the sheet, as I told you before. When they finished, they came to the experiment and they said, I solved X problems, give me X dollars. In another condition, they finished, they came to the experimenter and they said, I solve X problems, give me X tokens. And we paid people in pieces of plastic. They took this piece of plastic, walked 12 feet to the side and changed it for dollars. What's the difference between those 2 conditions? In one of them, you look into somebody in the eyes and you lie for dollars. You know you solved 4 problems and now you can say, I solved 6, give me $6. Or you can look at them in the eyes and say, I solved 6, give me 6 tokens. It's something that is at least 1 step removed from money. And what happened? Our participants doubled their cheating in that condition. Right? And we can all think about the idea that taking 25 cents from a petty cash box, we would feel that we're thieves. But if you took another drink from the fountain, or from the fountain drink, or if you took a pencil from the supply cabinet and so on, you might not feel dishonest to the same degree. And by the way, I found that experiment particularly troubling because as a society, we're getting to be a society that is multiple steps removed from money. Think about money, credit card, stock options, derivative. Think about dealing with people directly face-to-face versus over great distances. Could it be that as these distances are increasing, people find it easier to be dishonest, but still think of ourselves as being honest? So this was on the negative side. We find the things like creativity increases teaching, distance from money increases cheating, the idea that everybody else is doing it increases cheating, all of those things that basically help rationalization. Everything that you can think about that changes rationalization increases the tendency to be dishonest. The next question was, what would get people to be dishonest, less dishonest or more honest? And the idea for this came from a little joke. And the joke is a guy goes to the rabbi. It's a Jewish version. You can tell yourself a different version. And he says, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. Somebody stole my bicycle from synagogue. And the rabbi is appalled. He's saying, stealing your bicycle from synagogue? This is awful. He says, here is what you do. Come to synagogue next week and sit in the front row. And as we go over the 10 Commandments, turn around and look at everybody in the eyes. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who can't look you straight in the eyes, you'll know that's your thief. The guy is very excited about the suggestion. The rabbi is excited. The rabbi is anxious to know whether the advice worked. He waits for him at the end of the service and says, so did it work? And the guy said, it worked like magic. It worked like a charm. He says, the moment we got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike. You're probably wondering, what experiment is this joke leading to? We went to UCLA and we asked 500 students to try and recall the 10 Commandments. How many of them do you think were able to recall all 10 Commandments? No one. On the other hand, they invented lots of interesting new ones. By the way, as a side comment, because they were so creative with inventing new commandments, we started a new project. When we asked people, we said, look, the 10 Commandments were written a long time ago. If you were in charge, what would you give out? What would you add? How would you modify that? Turns out respect your parents is gone for most college students. How many people here think, by the way, that you could recall all 10 Commandments? A few? Okay. We'll test you later. The red shirter. But the question is, what happened after we got people to try and recall the 10 Commandments? The answer was that none of them cheated. Right? And it wasn't as if the people who remembered more commandments, the more religious people cheated less, and the people who remembered very few commandments cheated more. Nobody cheated. In fact, even when we take self-declared atheists and we ask them to swear on the Bible, they stop cheating. So that suggests that it's not so much about heaven and hell, it's about reminding people about their own moral fiber. And actually, we're doing an experiment now with the British Tax Authority, where British people are signing forms up front. They're basically signing the form saying that they're not going to cheat, and we have all kinds of moral reminders. If you think about most forms, in most forms you fill the form, you fill the form, you fill the form, and then you sign at the end. By that time, people finish cheating, it's over. Right? What if we got people to sign up front and reminded them about their own moral obligations? We have some nice results about this, but it's not all in yet. So, cheating is really, or dishonesty is really like lots of other human traits. We have these opposing forces, we want to view ourselves as good people, and then we have this selfish motivation, and it's a question of what is the game that happens between them. But the interesting thing is that we don't understand the causes of dishonesty very well. We have a tendency to think about people as either good or bad. We say, oh, as long as we just hire good people, everything would be okay. The reality is that that's not the case. We can hire really good people and put them in bad conflicts of interest and will have a very bad outcome. We're in a gym here. Imagine that your school played against another school. What is your biggest competition? You don't have any? Okay. Imagine you had a school that was a big competition for you, and you're playing a game and the referee called a call against your team. Could you help but see the referee as anything but evil, vicious, blind, something else, right? Really hard to think about it. The point is that the moment you have a strong motivation to see reality in a certain way, you'll be able to see reality in a certain way. And if you're a banker, it will change how you view mortgage-backed securities. If you're a politician paid by lobbyists, you'll get advantage from this. By the way, lobbying in the US is one of the best investment possible. Why? Because people are cheap. You can buy people a drink and a sandwich and they start looking at life from your perspective. So we have this problem with conflicts of interest, and we have a problem that we don't understand dishonesty. But I want to say two more things. One is that everything I've told you up to now about the experiments were about one shot. What happens when we give people many, many chances to cheat over time? And here is what we see. We give people hundreds of opportunities to be dishonest over time. Everyone is small, but hundreds of them. And what we see is in the beginning, people cheat just a little bit, right? This is, let's say, kind of no cheating at all. They cheat just a little bit, kind of balancing, trying to be honest, trying to benefit a little bit, the honest benefit. And then at some point, many people stop and switch, and they start cheating 100% of the time. Now, the exact point that people switch is different, but lots of people show this switch. And we call this point the what the hell effect. And you know, if you've been a dieter, you know the feeling, right? You go on a diet, then in the morning you eat something unhealthy, you say, I'm not a dieter today, I'll start tomorrow. Today I'll violate it even more. And the idea is that we think of ourselves in binary terms. We're either honest or dishonest. Now, we could be 92% honest and we still think of ourselves as honest. But if you think of yourself as 82% honest, is it really worthwhile to go to 85%? Not that much. If you're 82, you say, I might as well enjoy it and go all the way to the other side. So we thought, if this is the pattern in which people start being dishonest and then there's a point of failure in which they can switch completely and say, I'm not honest, I might as well go all the way, we thought, how could we stop that? And we thought about the Catholic confession. Anybody here Catholic? A few? Okay. So we thought about the Catholic confession, and this is no offense to the Catholics in the audience, but we went to talk to real Catholics. We went to Italy to talk to Catholic priests, and we asked them, we said, explain to us the logic of confession. From a rational economic perspective, if you can confess and get absolved, wouldn't you be more dishonest? In fact, wouldn't you be dishonest on the way to confession just to minimize time in purgatory? And the priest said no, and we came up with three potential theories for how confession might work. One is an ex ante perspective, where you say to yourself, well, I'm going to be dishonest, I might be caught, I might not, but for sure I'll have to talk to the priest. And this will be unpleasant, and I would not enjoy it, and I will have to do some Hail Marys and so on. Let me not do that. Basically increasing the cost of dishonesty. We tried that explanation, we find no evidence for that, not empirical evidence for that. The second possibility is that it's like the Ten Commandment experiment. You come out of confession and you feel good and wonderful and pure, and you don't want to destroy that feeling for a few hours or maybe for a few days, and we find some evidence for that. But the third one that we were most interested in is this idea of opening new pages. And the idea was that if you think of yourself as a bad person, why would you ever stop? But if you can open a new page, that might be actually quite useful. So we did this in a non-Catholic way. People come to the experiment, they cheat a little bit, they cheat a lot, we stop them, and we say, here's a piece of paper, why don't you write a list of the bad things you've done recently? And they write whatever they want, and then we ask them to shred it. And then we give them another sheet of paper, and we said, and if you want, you can ask forgiveness from whatever deity you believe in, and people do that as well. And what do you think happens after those two components, saying what you've done bad and asking for forgiveness? Dishonesty drops down to the pre-what the hell level. Now, if you give people lots of chances, it goes up again at some point, but at least for a while it stops. And I think this is one of those cases where religion has actually captured something important for social science and for society in general. What are these mechanisms that we can create for starting new pages? South Africa, of course, did it with the Reconciliation Act. You can say, how does a country move from an apartheid period to a post-apartheid period? Is there a smooth transition? There really isn't. But standing out there and saying, here's the list of all the awful things we've done and tomorrow we'll start differently, doesn't erase apartheid, but at least it helps a little bit start a new phase. And I think we can think about those mechanisms in all kinds of ways. I also want to say something about cultural differences. Anybody here grew up in a country outside of the US? Keep your hands up. Hands up. And any of you think that people in your country of origin cheat less than Americans? Less than Americans. Canadian? British? Yeah. Anybody else? Colombia? South America? This is the first Colombian, I think, who thinks that people in Colombia cheat less than Americans. We'll talk. So I grew up in Israel, so the first country I went to test was Israel. How many of you think the Israelis cheat more than Americans? It's a very politically correct group you have. Okay, so I was sure that the Israelis would cheat more than Americans. They don't. They cheat just like the Americans. Francesca Gino, my Italian collaborator, said, come to Italy. We'll show you what the Italians can do. The Italians cheat just like the Americans. We tried Turkey. We tried Canada. We tried the UK. We tried China. We tried Germany. We tried Colombia. They all cheat just the same. We haven't found differences yet. We're going to Portugal next week. Hoping. And here's the thing, right? You could say, why is cheating the same everywhere we've looked at so far? How can it be? I mean, we have the corruption index. Everybody who's traveled has seen dishonesty looks and feels very differently in different places. How can it be that in our experiments we don't find a difference? And here's the answer. The answer is that our experiments are general and abstract. They are not connected to any cultural context, they're not embedded in it. And because of that, they check and test the basic human ability to be dishonest and rationalize it. And in that regard, we are the same everywhere. Kind of our basic human skill of rationalization. But it doesn't mean that cheating is the same, because cheating in society is embedded in a culture. And this goes back to the story about Sam. What cheating does is it takes a particular activity, like illegal downloads, and say, don't worry about it. It takes a particular activity like copying homework from somebody and say, we don't worry about it. It takes a particular activity like saying cheating on taxes or cheating on insurance claim or exaggerating unemployment form, all kinds of things, and says it's not everything in life, it's just in this domain that we're behaving differently. And that's actually very worrisome, because if you think about it, this is what corruption is about. What corruption is about the fact that we know that something is illegal, but we just don't care. Right? So there are many countries in which you know that paying a bribe to a policeman is not the right thing to do in the eyes of the court, but you just don't care because everybody is doing it, because that's just the way you do business. That's how you want to live your life. That's what illegal downloads are in this society, right? When we just don't care anymore. And the thing is that there's this slippery slope downwards. There's a slippery slope of basically everybody's doing it and we don't care and we don't find it moral. And then once it gets to that situation, really hard to get back. And of course, we can think about this deterioration in all kinds of areas. We can think about it in healthcare, in banking. We can also think about it in academia and in students' life, right? What do we think about exaggerating on resumes, copying exams, taking work from other people? So let me just end by saying that for me, dishonesty is important on two grounds. First of all, it's another interesting example for an irrational tendency. It's something that we all have, but we don't understand exactly how it works. And if we want to fight it and we want to improve things, we actually have to figure out how it works. And the second thing is that dishonesty in society is incredibly crucial. if you think about it, honesty is a public resource. If we live in a society where everybody is honest and we can trust each other, everybody benefits from that. You can leave your door open and you could give people a handshake and you can promise them you'll do something and they trust you'll do it. But as this honesty increases and honesty goes down, everybody in society suffers. So honesty is really this precious public resource that as we chip into it, it's not just a particular activity, it is more general. Actually, let me end with one joke. I told you a little bit about Judaism, a little bit about Christianity. Let me try to combine the two. A guy goes to confession and he says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And the father said, "What have you done, my son?" The guy said, "I'm 72 years old and I just had sex with two 25-year-old twins." And the priest is appalled. And he said, "I can't believe that you've done that. This is terrible. This is awful." He said, "I'll tell you what to do. I want you to say 1,000 times Hail Mary and walk around the church 1,000 times and give $1,000 to charity. And how long has it been since your last confession?" The guy said, "It's my first confession." "What? You're 72 years old and it's your first confession? How can that be?" He says, "I'm Jewish." "So if you're Jewish, what are you doing here and why are you telling me?" "I'm telling everybody." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ariely, for being our convocation speaker today and also for launching our community discussions about academic integrity and honesty this coming year. At this time, I also want to thank the EC Reads Committee, chaired by Professor Claire Mehta, for their work this past year in selecting Dr. Ariely's book and planning programs throughout this year centered on academic integrity. We now conclude the program with a musical performance of the Emmanuel Alma Mater. Please stand, please.